To kick us off, I'm going to give a brief description of what we talk about when we talk about web archiving in this presentation. When we talk about web archiving, we refer to remote harvesting with a web crawler, or collecting digital objects from the web for the purposes of collecting and archival storage. There are several parts to this. There are seeds, which are basically URLs that serve as the starting point for the harvesting process. There are crawls, which are defined as the actual data that you get back when you go and harvest information from the web. That harvested information is called a crawl. There are captures, which are the actual act of going out onto the web and capturing those crawls. And there's scoping, which are parameters that are set on seeds to ensure that when you go out and capture, you get no more and no less information than you desire in your crawl. We're going to go over all this stuff a little more in depth later. Crawls are made up of WARC or ARC files, which is just the all-encompassing container of all of the data associated with a web crawl. So this includes the actual files, including any HTML, PHP, or CSS, as well as any embedded files like PDFs, videos, all that cool stuff. And any metadata associated with the crawl itself, such as your scoping parameters, the name of the crawl, your seed URLs, stuff like that. I'm going to kick it back over to Doriva for some pros and cons of the current web archiving software that we experimented with at Temple.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with talking about the California Digital Library's WAS, or Web Archiving Service product. And this is one of their services, their microservice components, such as DMP Tool or EasyID that you might be familiar with. Now, if you can't see this in the back, please don't despair, because the slides will be sent around by the kind folks here at Villanova. So the WAS interface is very simple and easy to understand. It leads you through creating your site, capturing sites, viewing your captures, and then creating public access to them. Now, in WAS, there is a nice hierarchical structure that you can follow, so that a project consists of multiple sites, and a site, in WAS terminology, consists of multiple seeds. So you can group URLs together for management purposes. And the reporting feature of WAS gives you lots of reports and information about each of your crawls, so you know exactly what happened and what URLs you grabbed. On the public interface side, you know that you're in an archived website because you have a distinctive white banner with a customized logo. And this tells you that you have a permanent archival URL, the original URL you grabbed, the date it was captured, and any metadata that the institution might have provided. So what are the pros of the WAS product? First off, you can get a free trial if you want. WAS charges one price per total amount of data that you store. You have the ability in WAS to distribute the administrative rights, so you can assign one of your staff members to administer one project and another person to administer another. You have the ability to group multiple seed URLs within one site, as I showed you before. And finally, on the public interface, you can customize both the logo and the banner.
So now I'm going to talk about a few of the less than stellar features of WAS. Namely that the captures, the scans that you get, come out kind of like this. That's a black box. And anyone who's done any type of development is aware that this means that you'd have no idea what's going on inside. You put your seed URLs in one side and out come your crawls, but that's it. You don't know what's going on. And so if you detect a problem after one of your captures, if you don't get all of the information you thought you had seeded properly, or if a page looks weird after you've captured it, which can happen for a number of reasons we're going to go over later, it's impossible to figure out what's going on using a tool like WAS. Especially is because there was also no proxy mode. Proxy mode would allow us to preview a harvested page as if we were not connected to the internet. And so because there is no proxy mode, it can lead to the dangers of zombie content. And this guy may be cute, but he's serious business. When zombie mode refers to when you're capturing a site but you don't capture everything. But when you're testing, since you're still connected to the internet, you can't detect that some of the content you're pulling in is just being pulled from the live web. So like an embedded video, images, or style sheets. So if that site goes away, so do the pieces that you didn't get. They leave dead spots in capture, so sort of like rotting off of your site, yeah, like a zombie. So here's an example of one of our dance websites that we captured, and we'd had a lot of hard time getting streaming video. So we opened this capture and yay, look, we got the video. But no, we didn't, because if we looked at the code, the source is still pulling directly from YouTube. So if this site ever goes down, if this video ever goes down rather from YouTube, if YouTube's copyright police come and take it away without warning, or if the person who put it up just decides to take it down, this is going to be a dead spot in our capture. And I'm going to kick it back over to Deriva.
So some of the other things to think about with the WAS product, there's no ability to do any patch or repair crawling. So if there's something wrong with your capture, you have to delete it and redo it. Some of the error messages can be rather non-intuitive. So for example, we would get a lot of indexing errors, or please wait and try again, over and over.
How long?
Slowness. While we were working with the WAS product, we found that the site response was so slow, both for our own captured sites and that of other publicly available sites, and it really ground quality assurance checks to a halt. There is no straightforward way to import any data into WAS from other services, and if you want to export data out of WAS, they charge you per terabyte to extract. Documentation. While we were working with the product, we found it to be outdated, and so that was a limitation. And the support team that we were working with was very small. Now, switching gears. The current product that we're using, ETIQUETTE, and ETIQUETTE is the hosted fee-based service of the Internet Archive. So how many people here have used the Wayback Machine? Yay, lots of people have used the Wayback Machine. So this is the fee-based web archiving product from the Internet Archive. Now likewise, its administrative interface is fairly straightforward to use and also consists of many reports and documentation for which you can review and investigate your crawls. On the public side, now Temple has no public content available at the moment, but check back, we'll have it for you. You can customize your logo, and you can provide metadata to describe your collections to the public for researchers. Some of the pros, again, you can get a free trial. You can make test crawls to see if your scoping is correct or not. The documentation is robust, and there's a larger distributed support team. There also appears, in our opinion, to have a shorter development life cycle for future revisions. There is an import available from other platforms and also from the Wayback Machine itself. So if you, like Temple, wants to grab all the former captures back to the early 90s and incorporate it in your collection for searchability and manageability, you can do so, but for a fee. ETIQUETTE does have the ability to crawl password-protected sites, so that may be of interest to some people. It also allows for more advanced scoping options, so you can use things like regular expressions to limit your crawl scope. And finally, proxy mode, which Kate mentioned. Proxy mode is the ability to set your browser's options to only view data that is in the crawl. So you won't get any of that pesky zombie content coming across. And in this example, here's the video, but right up front, this file wasn't found, was not captured. So you don't have any zombies coming to get you. ETIQUETTE has a lot of different reports. I won't go into that now, but they also offer some custom video viewers for streaming video or other video that you upload. Some cons of the product. The budget definition is different. ETIQUETTE has a budget model where you are charged on a yearly basis for a number of documents crawled, so you have a limit to how many pages you can crawl, and you have a limit per year of the storage that you use. So you have to be aware of that fact. There's a limit of 10 administrative users per account, and it has a more flattened organization of collections. So in ArchiveIt, when you create a collection, that's a list of host URLs. And you can organize and facet that based on the metadata you assign. In ArchiveIt, you cannot delete captures. So you can remove them from the public view so the public never sees them, but they're still charged to your budget. And you cannot, at the moment, transfer one URL seed from one collection to another. But they say they're hoping to include that in a future revision.
Right, thank you. So now I'm going to talk about the only offline tool that we experimented with. It's called HTTRACK Website Copier. It's a little GPL downloadable utility. You can go and install it on your desktop. And it's meant to go out and grab a URL and harvest all the files and download them locally to your machine. So one of the pros is that it's free. And I don't mean a trial. It's totally free. You download it, it's yours forever. Likewise, because we have all of the files down on our computer, the scan is a clear box. Look at how my little penguin friend can see right through. He can see into the scans. He knows everything. So this is a good thing because, as I mentioned, with the black boxes, if you've got problems, you're kind of out of luck. You're going to sort of just be rescoping and rescoping, and that may not even be the problem. Whereas with clear scans like this, you can analyze the files that are problematic, look directly into the source code, and see what's going on. Likewise, because you're able to download the files physically to your machine, it's a great way to generate physical backups of a site or any of the site files. And you can put these wherever you want. You can dump them into a repository or keep them on a RAID drive, something like that. Also, this was the only tool that we experimented with where you could pretend to be a different user agent. So that means you could come in as pretending to be a Firefox user or an IE user or Lynx user, if anybody remembers Lynx. So I know. Oh, it's like, who wants that? But someone apparently.
Users in the back. Okay.
Yeah, I know, right? So that was the only tool we found that could do that. So that was interesting in an age where there are different appearances based on what browser you're in, or some websites are actually designed to work better in different browsers. So that was kind of useful. This is what the basic interface looks like when you launch the application. You can create a capture. You've got your project name. You give it a category. You give it some seed URLs here. And then you tell it where you want it to download on your machine, and then there it goes. It just sits on your machine exactly where you tell it to go. And this is what it looks like. Every capture gets a folder, a directory where everything goes, and then you get a WHTT file, WinHTTRACK file, and that stores all of the information about that crawl. So you can just double-click on that, open it in HTTRACK, and perform the exact same scan with the exact same parameters again. And this is what it looks like inside of one of those directories. You've got all of the directories from the different sources where we pull from, and any of the physical files, and they're right there. Now, there are a couple of cons to this software. While you do have a lot of control over what you look like and the scoping that you put in place, as the saying goes, with great power comes a lot of non-intuitive user interfaces. And here's an example right over here. It's like, I mean, you got a lot of cool stuff. You can add scan rules and all that, but I liken it to something like this, where if you climb aboard knowing what the controls do, you can do a lot, and if you don't know, you're going to panic and just maybe not be able to do hardly anything.
You're flying the plane.
And this is the problem because by default, HTTRACK has a very limited scope. If you just give it a URL and say, I don't want to worry about having to define all kinds of scoping rules, you'll get stuff, but you're going to exclude a lot of key things. It was my experience that we excluded a lot of style sheets and images. And so I had to make some very serious adjustments, but you kind of have to learn how to use that interface through trial and error. So I guess the good thing is that it's free, but you need to have patience when learning it. Also, obviously there's no front end for this. You're just meant to download this stuff to your machine. So it's not really meant to function as a gallery of harvested sites. It's more designed to function as a dark archive, as a way to back up a website and put it on a shelf, and then only if you need it, go back and pull that stuff out. So those are the only cons, but really it's sort of a different tool than the online tools that we've worked with. Also, it's important to, just because the files came down to your machine, you should still look at them. They can still not work. Here's an example of one that I opened up, one of the HTML files that was supposed to have harvested well, and it hadn't. However, because we were able to go and look at the code, we were able to tell immediately where the problems were, and then we were able to move on and make corrections. So now I'm going to talk about some more common roadblocks that can happen when you're trying to scan, regardless of the tools that you may be using. As we've been mentioning, there is a learning curve to any piece of software that you're going to use. Our advice is to take advantage of training opportunities that are out there. If the tools have documentation or tutorial videos, you can use that if you're lucky enough to have some. Also recommend looking at scholarly articles if anybody's tackling the use of these tools, and reaching out to other organizations to see if anybody's using them. QA is an extensive process that requires a lot of training. This is the process by which you make sure that the crawls are correct and all of your data looks good. And Dory was going to talk more about this, so I'm not going to get into it right now. Capturing streaming media, as we mentioned before, is a bear, and that's because a lot of the streaming media services out there are continuously changing the ways that they obfuscate the URLs and the ways that they serve up the video as a means to combat piracy, as well as a means to more efficiently serve up videos. So that's good news for them, but it's bad news for us because the harvesting tools aren't able to keep up with this moving target necessarily. Now, ROADBLOCKS actually has a method by which it captures streaming media. So that was one of the big pluses for us about ROADBLOCKS. Likewise, JavaScript and other dynamically scripted sites and actions, if there's content that loads after a page loads, if there are things that are triggered by user interactions, this can be difficult for a web crawler to trigger or to detect in a harvest. So this is another thing that requires some extensive examination of your crawls after the fact to see if everything went through. And finally, robots.txt. Does anyone here know what robots.txt files are? Awesome. Well, I'll just summarize quickly. This is an example of a robots.txt file. And if you look at this little part up top here, which you don't have to read, it's a little text file that sits in the base directory of a website that blocks crawlers and bots from harvesting the site. So this is originally meant to keep out search engines from certain parts of a site so that these pieces aren't discoverable in a search engine. And it's also meant to keep out certain types of spam bots. However, one of the side effects is it often keeps out harvesting crawlers for archival purposes, which leads to our next point about copyright and privacy concerns. If a robots.txt file is there to hide certain parts of a site from being discovered by search engines, to hide it from the world, or to hide things like admin interfaces and sensitive information, why should we get to harvest this? Because many of the harvesting utilities out there do have a means of bypassing this security layer. However, we want to be polite about this. There's a method to it that's not just plowing full steam ahead and hoping it's cool. And the simplest thing to do is just to ask first. If this is not a site that belongs to your organization, even if it's a partner organization, the right thing to do is to give them an email, give them a call, and see if explain what you're doing, explain what you need, and see if they're okay with it. And this actually came up yesterday during a web archiving breakout session that in many cases nowadays with more CMSs like Drupal and WordPress, they come with the boilerplate robots.txt file that can block things like style sheets from being pulled in by a crawler. And most of the time, if you ask organizations that use these utilities that are breaking your crawl, they may not even be aware that the robots.txt file is there, and they'll certainly be okay with you harvesting it, but they will also be glad that you asked. And so now I'm going to let Deriva field this particularly tough question. What if they don't respond?
Yeah, what if they don't respond to you? So really, what you want to do here is think about this question as you're making your plans. So for now, at Temple University, we're focusing on Temple University websites. So we're okay to bypass robots.txt because it's internal to our own structure. But our Special Collections Research Center is working with their donors, and they're writing in directly to the donor agreement clauses for web archiving and also born digital material accessioning. So that's a good way of covering this. And the other thing is, at least at Temple, we have close relationships with our donors. So our Special Collections Research Center can email and write our donors and basically ask them to include just a 1 or 2 line exclusion into robots.txt, which is really easy. All they have to do is cut and paste, and it will allow the ArchiveIt crawler, also a WAS crawler if you're using WAS or another service, to be able to crawl what they need. Moving on, how do you develop a sustainable solution for web archiving at your institution? First thing you need to think about is staff turnover. How are you going to support this project if people move in and out of your organization? What happens if a paid service that you contract were to shut down? Do you have a backup? Do you have an exit strategy? Budget creep. I talked a little bit about budgeting. I'm going to talk some more in a minute. But basically, you want to avoid any surprises at the end of the year. Thinking about training. Training is very important. Start with your staff first. Make sure they understand what is the entire crawling process. Develop clear rubrics and communication, specifically for QA, and very specifically if you plan on using interns or graduate or undergraduate student workers to help you with your QA of your crawls. Need I say it? Document, document, document some more. When in doubt, document even more. You'd like to document, ideally, all of your procedures, your best practices, your workflows, document your seeds, and if possible, at least many of your captures. If you have budget requirements for page or storage, track that as well. And I find really useful to document any research I do about what other institutions are doing and what best practices they've discovered. Because the whole goal here is not to reinvent the wheel. Budget models. Again, I'll repeat. Understand exactly what your service budget model calls for. If you have to track the number of documents per year that you crawl, do so and do so regularly. Also, the amount of storage that you're using. It adds up quickly. And if you have any plans on either ingesting data from an outside source or for exporting data for your own backups or another purpose, plan on spending extra money.
Oh, goody, goody. So now I'm going to talk about something that we all need to be aware of, particularly as it regards budget models. Mushrooming crawls. And what we mean when we say that is basically what it sounds like. You know, when you get mushrooms and the way they grow, there's just more and more until it's like this that's overtaking you. What this means is when you set up a crawl, you want to make sure that your seeds are scoped appropriately so that you're not accidentally grabbing way more information than you intend. And this can be a problem for websites that are linking to sites on the web. Say, for instance, your organization links to your organization's YouTube page, which in turn links to a suggested video, which goes to another website, and the next thing you know, you've got a third of the internet on your hard drive. And that's a problem. I can liken this to cell phone usage. So anyone who has a data plan on their cell phone and is familiar with roaming charges and going international, if you kind of are not very aware of what your cell phone is doing with your with regards to sort of the background processes like syncing to Wi-Fi towers when you go internationally, you can come home and find a very unpleasant surprise in the form of a bill because you are not necessarily aware of the scope of the reach of your phone's plan. So this is something that's similar with scoping your URLs, and ways to combat this are to have some method of doing a test crawl, as we mentioned before. So that was one of the reasons why ArchiveIt was a big plus for us, is that it had this gorgeous test crawl feature built in where we could set the theoretical seed URLs, we could set the scope of those URLs, and see if, oh my goodness, we started capturing YouTube halfway through, let's block that. And this is where something like a free tool like HTTRACK can come in handy if you don't have something that has that. You can test some of your scoping parameters in a tool like that and see what happens, and it's free. And finally, we're going to talk about one final question, which is a very library-oriented question. So I'm going to just kick it back over to Doriva, and we're going to leave you with that.
Okay. So this is the Library Penguin. And Library Penguin asks, how can we integrate this into our existing digital collections? So our final thought today, we're going to leave you with this question. Because now that you've decided to embark on a web archiving project and you have all these ideas, how are you going to integrate what you capture into your overall collection strategy, into your overall digital collections? So for example, how are you going to integrate your web captures into your finding aids? How are you going to incorporate your captures into your discovery layer? How are you going to integrate perhaps into your OPAC records or collection level records? And how might you organize your other websites to allow for maximum findability, searchability, and description of the captures that you've put so much time and loving effort into to produce? That's your homework for today. Thank you very much.
You guys didn't know you were going to get a homework. So there's our information. Follow us on Twitter, send us emails, and we're happy to take any questions now.